would never do anything worse, not nearly as what racism and white supremacy has done to us as a people. So I'd rather fight that with the black man, because the most horrific thing is the racism and white supremacy. That's the ugliest thing to me that could take place on the planet.
Well, I love my God because that's my God. How mercy, how mercy, how mercy, how mercy, how mercy. That's my God.
Martyred, whatever. And they trouble us, and we see the impact that they had, and it often changes our nation in a different direction. But the Emmett Till case, when people learn about it, they don't simply treat it as a historical event. People today, when they see that picture of Emmett Till in his casket, they have the same reaction that people did who first filed by that casket 61 years ago. That impact has never diminished one bit, and people react today just as if they were walking by that. And I don't know too many cases where you can get that kind of anger, that it's almost like it's happening right now and you're seeing it unfold, even though it happened 60 years ago. And when something has that kind of an impact, you know it's significant, and you know what a moment it was in our history. I heard about this in 1994, came to know Emmett Till Mobley 2 years later, kept up a friendship with her until 2003 with her death. And then for the next year and a half, as I was expecting the case to reopen, you'd hear little tidbits. I had friends who were working closely with the FBI, and they would let me know that, yeah, it's going to happen soon, and this is going to happen, and you can expect an investigation. And finally, in May of 2004, they announced that the case was going to be reopened. And whenever I say reopened, the FBI agent who was in charge of that, Dale Killinger, he always corrects me and says it wasn't reopened, it was opened. Because the first time around, it was never really investigated, so how can you reopen a case that really wasn't investigated the first time? So I try to remember, if I remember that, saying the case was opened and investigated really for the first time in 2004. And over the next few months I thought, you know something, I've read the books that have come out, and some have had a specific focus. Like there was a documentary history that published newspapers in chronological order of the events of the Till case. And then there was Emmett Till Mobley's memoir. So there are memoirs. There are people who wrote novels. And a few people published theses or dissertations or even a book or two. Press, the northern press versus the southern press, or the white press versus the black press, how they dealt with the case and the trial. But nobody had really attempted to write a fully comprehensive account of the case. And I thought there were so many facts and so many events and so many little events kind of behind the scenes that people were missing out on that I thought were so important to tell. And then there was the issue of contradictory accounts of what happened, that I thought, I need to dig a little deeper and see, what did people say at the time versus what their memory tells us now. And because I saw that some of the people involved, they, just because memory is that way, we kind of events will shape us, but then misinformation that we hear suddenly becomes what our experience was, and we don't know the difference after several decades. And I saw that some of the key players said some contradictory things at the time, and they were saying something different now, just kind of what we do. No intention to misrepresent what really happened, but I realized that I had to get at the contradictions, and I wanted to tell a comprehensive account of the case. And so over the next 10 years, that's what I did. I did a ton of research. I went to Mississippi over a dozen times, went to Chicago, interviewed family members, witnesses, journalists who covered the trial, and of course Emmett Till Mobley before she died, and other family members, and one spectator who remembered the trial vividly. And so, one of the reasons I started the book at the time I did is with the investigation in progress, I realized, the final chapter of this book hasn't been written yet, and I'm writing a book where I don't even know what the outcome is going to be. And so I began working on it, and it wasn't until 2007, after I was a few years into the research and was doing some writing at that time on the earlier chapters, that the FBI investigation concluded and no one was ever prosecuted. They tried, called a grand jury in February of 2007, and the grand jury felt there wasn't enough evidence, and so nobody was ever prosecuted. But as I was writing, I realized, you know, in these early stages that I don't know the outcome of it's a 60-year-old case, but I don't know how the final chapter is going to end because it's still unfolding. And I thought that was a unique moment for a writer to writing about something so old yet that was so current at the same time. And so the book came out finally in August, and it's been well received so far, and I think I feel like I achieved what I wanted to achieve by writing it, and I hope that if you read it or have read it, that I'd love to hear what you think about it as well. But I want to just read a couple things too from the book that I think are powerful moments that are they're hard. They were hard for me to write, and they were hard for me to, they're still hard for me to read some of this, but I think it's important. And as we talked about Emmett Till Mobley's brave moment, which was really the turning point here, and I guess there were a few different, the whole thing is kind of, I don't know if anybody's ever been to Money, Mississippi. Has anybody ever been there? Of course, that's where the Bryant. Oh, we have one. Okay.
Been here. He's been there. Tom.
Okay. If you go there, you can't possibly think anything of significance really ever could have happened there. And there are only about 100 people in the area today. A lot of fields, a few plantation homes still around. No functioning businesses whatsoever. The post office was in a trailer, was the last thing that was left, and that closed down a few years ago. The cotton gin isn't around. The Bryant grocery store is sort of standing today. I think if you blow on it real hard, it's going to cause those walls to finally come down. The roof is caved in. The walls are, some of the walls are, I think the brick has fallen off. Like they're only about half as high as they were. The front is just being held up by a thread, it feels like. It's too dangerous to stand very close for very long, and you kind of worry that it might come tumbling down. But when you're there, you don't get a sense that anything could have happened. But this most obscure place in the country, with people who are very obscure in themselves, and the Moses Wright family and Emmett Till, this is Emmett Till's uncle and cousins, lived about 3 miles west of Money. So it was even more remote than downtown Money was. And so they go into a store that night in August of 1955, and that brief exchange between Emmett Till and Carolyn Bryant was something that nobody ever, at the beginning, anybody would have thought about beyond the next day or two. Wouldn't have really, the news of it wouldn't have reached outside of Money, and that everybody would have gone on their lives and forgotten about it. But that one moment, this is before internet, before 24-hour cable news, before, the way we instantly receive information today. Within weeks, everybody knew the name Emmett Till, or within days. And within a few weeks, the world sat captivated, and journalists from all over the country to hear this trial and to witness this. And there were many reasons, a few key reasons. We talked about Mamie's courage with this decision, but there have been lynchings in Mississippi forever. And anybody who was from the South at the time understood that this was, we had slavery, we had Jim Crow, which was still, those laws were still in place then. We'd had the Supreme Court decision outlawing segregation in the public schools, declaring it unconstitutional. But there was an immediate white backlash to that decision. Things didn't get better in the South right away, and especially Mississippi, the last to really desegregate, and they fought tooth and nail to keep their schools segregated. So we had this decision, but the result of that decision was an increase of this backlash meant more lynchings. Reverend George Lee, Lamar Smith, 2 men who were active in black voter registration, the NAACP, they're murdered, and their killers are never apprehended or tried. And then a couple weeks after Lamar Smith came Emmett Till. So the context of his death, people in the South knew very well how this would fit in, or how it fit in, and they knew well at the time what the outcome would be of the trial. But I want to read just a couple of things here. This is when Mamie Bradley at the time went to the funeral home to identify her son for the first time. And I just want to read a couple of paragraphs here because you can understand what this was like for her, a mother losing her only child and then having to go identify him and having a difficult time doing so because of the condition of his body. So the body had just come in from Chicago, and on page 55 here, after the casket left the train station, Mamie, her father, and Rayfield Moody, who was her cousin, and her boyfriend, Gene Mobley, followed Mr. Rayner to his mortuary. Simeon Booker, who was correspondent of Ebony Jet magazines, and David Jackson, photographer for the same publications, were waiting outside. They had been there since midnight, not knowing when Emmett's body was going to arrive. Finally, the hearse pulled up, followed by Mamie's party. After Mamie got out of the car and walked into the building, Booker and Jackson followed behind. Mamie waited with her family in a separate room while Rayner opened the casket, and now a witness to the body's condition himself, he again tried to dissuade Mamie from viewing it. After this failed, Rayner acquiesced. Rayfield Moody went in first, looked at the mangled corpse, and then went back for Mamie. With her father on one side and Gene Mobley on the other, she made her approach to the room containing her son. Then quoting her, and this is a speech she gave just a few at the time, I think it was a month or so later. The first thing that greeted us when we walked into the parlor was a terrible odor. I think I'll carry that odor with me to my grave, end quote. And yeah, she said this a few months later, and as she neared the casket, she could see her son naked, covered with lime. What I saw looked like it came from out of space. It didn't look like anything that we could dream, imagine in a funny book, or any place else. It just didn't look like it was for real. Then standing over the casket, Mamie began to examine Emmett's right side. And the information I used for her description here came from her earliest descriptions in a couple of speeches she gave close to the event. And I wanted to get her earliest, most recent recollection of how she went about identifying him, because later on it was harder for her to remember exactly how she did it, and kind of changed a little bit from what she said originally. So I went with, in almost every case in the book, I would try to see if this seemed to match what others said at the time, or matched other testimony that people gave. And when that was the case, I went with the earliest accounts, because I thought they would be the most vivid, the most accurate, and not having to rely on memory. But standing over the casket, Mamie began to examine Emmett's right side. She first noticed a large gash in his forehead, which she assumed had been made with an axe. The mouth was open and the tongue was protruding. And this is her speaking. His lips were twisted and his teeth were bared, just like a snarling dog's, she said. Then she saw the gunshot wound. I wondered why they wasted a bullet, because surely it wasn't necessary. At that point she realized they had beaten him so badly that shooting him seemed to be, a waste of time. I found that part of the ear, some features she recognized, such as the nose and forehead. One eye was missing, probably lost during the embalming process, but the other, despite being detached, was the right color. Still looking at the right side, she said, I found that part of the ear was gone and the entire back of the head had been knocked out. Mamie then asked Mr. Rayner to remove her son from the casket so that she could examine the left side also. He agreed, but asked her to go home first, send back some clothes, and then finish viewing the body once it was dressed. And although Mamie left, Simeon Booker and David Jackson from the press stayed behind and watched as attendants lifted the body from the casket and placed it onto a slab. In that instant, they were horrified to see a piece of Till's skull fall off and even bits of his brains come out. This came from an account from Simeon Booker. And he said, calmly, Dave replaced the skull, just like putting on a hat. Mamie and her party returned to the mortuary an hour or so later. When she approached her son the second time as he lay clothed on a slab, she saw for the first time the left side of his face. It looked as if somebody had taken a crisscross knife and gone insane. It was beaten into a pulp. David Jackson took photos of Till's battered face with Mamie present, which would appear in Jet magazine in its September 15th issue. They would be reprinted in several black newspapers in the coming weeks, which greatly impacted national news coverage of the murder. And this was still before the trial. The trial began just 3 weeks after the murder, but they had a few weeks, and this is one of the things that really created so much outrage. Jet publisher John Johnson, hesitant at first to print such graphic images, consented in the end. The 400,000 print run sold out. Although Mamie remained horrified by what she saw upon her return, Rayner had in fact touched up the body slightly while she was gone. He closed the mouth and sewed the gash in the jaw and forehead. Mamie, already having seen enough evidence of indescribable torture, knew that she could never explain it to anyone. Others would have to see it too. After Rayner had done what he could, Mamie determined to have an open casket funeral to let the world see what they did.
You just listened to a discussion on the murder, lynching, rite of passage of Emmett Louis Till by historian Devery Anderson. This incident and absence of justice is just as alarming some 60 years later as the day it happened. After having read Mr. Anderson's book, it is as complete a narrative on Emmett Till as has been done. The drama surrounding the alleged incident, the abduction, the murder, the trial, the verdict, the admission of guilt, the autopsy, the grand jury, and the second verdict is absolutely intense. In this from Emmett Till to Ron Sebels, to Latasha Harlins, Trayvon Martin, to Michael Brown, and the many others not mentioned. Little has changed. We all can do more, and we should. Later this year, 2016, Writing to Save a Life, the Louis Till File by John Edgar Wideman is due to be released. Louis Till is Emmett Till's father and was accused of the rape of a white woman, of course, and hung by the neck in Italy during the Second World War. There are some startling revelations, to say the least, in this book. Stay tuned to SO1 Books YouTube. There is more to come. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the sweet name of Mrs. Mamie Till Mobley, a wonderful black lady. Keep learning. Peace.
In the heat of the night, I've got trouble wall to wall.